Most people think a stroke starts suddenly, severe, obvious, impossible to ignore. But sometimes it starts with something simple, a slight dizziness, a brief feeling of imbalance, a moment where the world feels off. And that's why it's dangerous, because it doesn't feel like an emergency. It feels like something small, something temporary, something you can ignore. And most people do. They sit down, they wait, they tell themselves it will pass, and sometimes it does. But sometimes it was never just dizziness, because dizziness can be one of the earliest signs that something is wrong with blood flow to the brain, and the brain reacts quickly, even to small changes. But those changes don't always look dramatic, they look subtle, and subtle things are easy to miss. Not every dizziness is dangerous, but some types are, and the difference is not always obvious. One key factor is sudden onset. If dizziness appears quickly, without warning, it should not be ignored. Another factor is intensity. If you feel like you might fall, or cannot keep balance, that is not normal. Also pay attention to coordination. If simple movements feel difficult, if walking feels unstable, and this is important. Another critical sign is combination. Dizziness together with weakness, numbness, blurred vision, difficulty speaking, even if mild, even if brief, this combination changes everything because now it is not just a symptom, it is a pattern. And patterns tell a story, and sometimes that story is about the brain not getting enough blood. Dizziness is one of the most misunderstood symptoms because it happens for many reasons: fatigue, stress, low blood pressure, dehydration, and because it is common, it is often dismissed. People get used to it, they normalize it, they stop paying attention, but not all dizziness is the same. There is a difference between feeling light for a second and losing stability, between slight discomfort and a sense that your body is not responding correctly. Another important detail: when dizziness appears suddenly, without a clear reason, that matters, especially if it feels unusual, different from what you have experienced before, because the body remembers patterns. And when something breaks that pattern, it is a signal, not noise. Not all dizziness feels the same, and that difference is critical. Some dizziness is light, you feel slightly off, but you can still function. Other dizziness is different. It feels like the world is moving, like the ground is unstable, like your body is not responding correctly. That type is important, especially if it appears suddenly. Another key sign is loss of control. You try to walk, but something feels wrong. Not just weak, but uncoordinated, as if your body and brain are not fully connected. This is not typical fatigue. This is not normal stress. This is a signal. Another detail most people miss: duration does not matter. Even if it lasts a few seconds, even if it disappears, it still matters, because temporary does not mean harmless. Sometimes temporary is the warning. The biggest mistake people make is waiting to see if it passes, waiting to feel worse, waiting for certainty. But waiting is dangerous because early symptoms are the window, the moment where action is most effective, and that window is small. Many people think if it was serious, it would get worse. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it improves, and that creates false safety. A person feels better, so they do nothing. But the underlying problem may still be there, and the next time, it may not be mild. Another important point: the brain does not have reserves like other organs. It needs constant blood flow, and even short interruptions matter. So when you wait, you lose time. And when it comes to the brain, time is everything. Dizziness alone is often ignored, but combinations are what make it dangerous, and most people do not connect the symptoms. For example, dizziness plus slight weakness in one arm, not complete loss of strength, just a strange feeling. Another combination: dizziness plus difficulty speaking, not inability, just slight confusion, words come slower or not as clearly. Another important sign: dizziness plus vision changes, blurred, double vision, or a moment where focus is lost. Each of these alone may seem small, but together they create a pattern, and that pattern is not random. It points to the brain, and when the brain is involved, time matters. Every minute matters, because the longer the brain is affected, the greater the risk. Many people who had a stroke say the same thing. It started with something small. A person stands up, feels dizzy, waits a moment, feels a bit better, continues the day. Nothing dramatic, no panic, just a strange moment. Later, it happens again, this time a bit stronger, but still manageable, still not serious. And again, they ignore it because it doesn't stop them, because they can still function, because it doesn't feel urgent. And that is exactly why it's dangerous, because the warning comes quietly, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to be noticed, but easy to ignore. Stroke rarely feels like a single event at the beginning. It often follows a pattern: small signals, repeated over time, dizziness, then normal, then again. Each time slightly different, slightly stronger, or combined with something else, but because each episode is short, people treat them as separate. They don't connect them. They don't see the pattern, but the body is not random. When something repeats, it has a reason. And repetition is one of the strongest signals because it shows progression, not a one-time event, but a developing problem. And when the brain is involved, progression means risk. There is a moment many people remember after everything happens, a moment they ignored, a moment they dismissed, a moment they said, "I'll wait." It could be a few seconds of dizziness, a strange feeling in the body, a brief loss of balance, nothing dramatic, but different. And that difference was real, but it was not enough to act. So they moved on. And later, that same moment becomes clear. It was not random, it was a signal. And the problem is not that the signal was unclear. The problem is that it did not feel urgent. And humans react to urgency, not to subtlety, but the body speaks in subtlety first. And if you miss that, you only get the louder version later. One of the most dangerous thoughts a person can have is this: it passed, so it's fine. Because when dizziness disappears, it feels like the problem is gone. The body feels normal again, balance returns, clarity comes back, and that creates relief. But relief is not always safety, because sometimes the symptom disappears, but the cause remains. This is especially important when it comes to the brain, because the brain can experience temporary disruptions, short interruptions in blood flow, and then recover. But that recovery does not mean everything is stable. It means the system compensated. For now, this is what many people don't understand. They think symptoms define the problem. But sometimes, symptoms only show the surface. Underneath, the condition is still developing. And this is where danger grows, because now the warning is gone, but the risk is still there. And without the warning, there is no urgency, so nothing changes. And that is how people move from early signal to full event, without realizing the transition. There is a point where time becomes critical, not hours, not days, seconds, because the brain depends on constant blood flow. And when that flow is disrupted, even briefly, cells begin to suffer. Function begins to change, signals become distorted, and the longer it continues, the harder it becomes to reverse. This is why early moments matter, not because they are dramatic, but because they are the only time you still have control. Once the process progresses, options become limited, recovery becomes harder, and outcomes change. But before that point, everything is still flexible. That is the moment most people miss, because it doesn't look serious, because it doesn't feel urgent, because it doesn't stop them immediately, but that moment is the difference between prevention and consequence. And once it passes, you don't get it back. There is always a moment before something serious happens when you still have a choice, not a dramatic moment, not something obvious, just a small signal, a brief dizziness, a strange sensation, a moment where something feels wrong, but not enough to stop you. And that is why it's dangerous, because nothing forces you to act. You can ignore it, you can continue, you can wait, and most people do, because it feels easier, because it feels safe, but that moment is the only moment where everything can still change. After that, you are no longer choosing, you are reacting. People are afraid of stroke, but they are afraid of the wrong part. They imagine the worst moment, the collapse, the loss of control, the emergency, but they don't fear the beginning. They don't fear the quiet signal, because it doesn't look dangerous, it doesn't feel dramatic. But the beginning is the only part you can influence. The rest is consequence, and that is the shift most people never make. They fear what happens later, but ignore what happens first. And that is why they feel powerless, not because they had no control, but because they didn't recognize when they had it. Your body does not fail suddenly. It warns you, quietly, subtly, early, through small moments, moments you can ignore or understand, and that choice matters, because sometimes the difference between a normal day and a life-changing event is not something big, it's something small that you decided to ignore. The body rarely sends just one signal. It repeats, again and again, but not always in the same way. Sometimes it's dizziness. Another time, weakness. Another moment, confusion. Each time slightly different. And that's what confuses people. They don't see repetition, they see separate events. But the body doesn't work randomly. If something comes back, it has a reason. And repetition is one of the strongest warnings, because it shows progression, not a sluchai, not a coincidence, but a process. And the longer that process continues, the higher the risk. There is always a moment people remember later, a moment they dismissed, a moment they ignored, a moment that didn't feel important. At the time, it was nothing. But later, it becomes everything, because that was the signal, that was the warning, that was the point where things could have changed. And the truth is simple. Your body is already telling you what's happening. The question is not whether there are signals. The question is, will you take them seriously in time? There is something many people understand, but only after it's too late. The body does not betray you, it prepares you step by step, signal by signal, moment by moment. But the problem is not the body, the problem is attention, because attention follows what feels urgent: pain, fear, strong symptoms. But the most important signals do not feel urgent. They feel small, almost unimportant, a brief dizziness, a moment of imbalance, a strange feeling that passes quickly. And because it passes, it is dismissed. But here is the truth: what passes quickly can still be serious, because duration does not define danger. Nature does, origin does. And when the brain is involved, even seconds matter. Another thing most people misunderstand: they think they will know when something is serious. They expect a clear sign, something undeniable, something that forces action. But reality is different. Serious problems often begin quietly, without drama, without clarity, without urgency. And that is why they are missed, because humans are not trained to react to subtlety. We react to extremes, but health is not about extremes. It's about patterns, about changes, about signals that break your normal state, and those signals are already there, right now, in your body, in your daily experience, in the moments you ignore. And here's the most important part: you don't need to become afraid, you need to become aware, because fear comes too late. Awareness comes early, fear reacts, awareness prevents. And that difference changes everything. Because the goal is not to recognize a stroke, the goal is to never reach that point. And that starts with something very simple: noticing what feels different, not dismissing it, not explaining it away, but pausing and paying attention. Because sometimes the smallest moment you ignore today becomes the biggest moment of your life tomorrow. If there is one thing you should never do, it's ignore something that feels different. Not painful, not extreme, just different. Because your body has a baseline, a normal state. And when something breaks that baseline, it matters, even if it's brief, even if it disappears, even if it seems small. Small changes are how big problems begin, not suddenly, but quietly. And the earlier you respond, the easier it is to stop the progression.